Hi there, and welcome to Queens Behind the Scenes, where we empower women to lead, transform, and shine. And today we are back with another riveting episode of Queens Behind the Scenes, where we pull back the curtain to reveal the strategies, stories, secrets behind women making power moves. I'm your host, Charise Beckett, and today we have a powerhouse joining us. She's a globally recognized leadership development expert and executive coach to top leaders across industries, across the globe, and a fierce advocate for women in leadership. India Gary Martin. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
I'm so excited to have you. India and I worked together when I was at Planned Parenthood. She was a consultant, and I just developed the most amazing relationship. And we just both were our authentic selves. And I really, really just enjoyed meeting you.
I know it's been great. It's interesting to see how things have evolved over time.
Oh my gosh, both of them, everything. So today's episode is about redefining leadership, and we're going to dive into the evolution of leadership, the importance of authenticity, and then how you can position yourself to lead with confidence. So grab your coffee, your journal, or maybe a glass of wine, and let's get into it.
Let's go.
Let's do it. All right. So let's start with your journey. I want to hear about your journey. You have had a remarkable career. And I want to know what ignited your passion for leadership development. So start with your journey and then start with the igniting.
So I have always kind of known. Well, it's really funny. I think I've always shown up as a leader, but it was a little bit not necessarily what I would classify and define as classical leadership earlier in my life. Though when I look back, it was leadership. It was all my foolishness was leadership. But after I graduated from college, my first job was on Wall Street, and it was at a time when women, like, first off, you wore black, gray, or navy.
Okay.
And skirts only. There were no trousers when I first landed.
Pantyhose,
and pretty much like some brown pantyhose. And pretty much black shoes. It was shady. It was shady times. We were not looking great. But no, I always look great. But I kind of landed on Wall Street, and first off, kind of looking ahead of me, there was nobody who could look like me. And when I say that, I mean, like, it was a very male-dominated industry. In the first instance, as a woman of color, I didn't even think about that part because that was just a real non-starter. So it was like, are there other women doing this? And I remember that we used to meet in secret, which was a trip because we didn't want people to think that we were like, kind of conspiring to take over.
Mm-hmm.
But I went into investment banking very early in my career, and one thing I did decide is I looked at the corner office and I'm thinking, I wonder what they do, because whatever they're doing, they're in charge, and that's where I want to be, and I need to figure that method out, like what's happening there. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of things that I learned as I grew through my career to kind of get to that place, and that was that in this day, and in most days, I think any time you want to get to the office, it's about understanding the journey of the people who are sitting in it, right? And that theirs may not look like yours, but there are definitely some things that you need to consider, and there are going to be some things you need to learn. And so you identify how to figure out what those things are without somebody necessarily looking like you. Because it's like when I thought about my mentors, the people who actually propelled me the most were white men, frankly.
Same, except for when I was with Danny. That was the only time, but that has been my experience my whole career. Yep.
And so, but these people who grew me, like, really poured into me in ways that I couldn't have ever expected, and did help to shift me. So, I think one of the things I would say is that you always look to people who share your values when you're thinking about how to grow, and look at what they do and what your gaps are and how they might help you fill those gaps.
Yeah.
So that's a philosophy piece. But like in terms of my career, I started as an analyst. I moved up through the ranks. I was in a number of different countries. I was in my 25-year career. I was 20 of those years outside of the U.S. I'm kind of learning global markets and building relationships in other places, which has served me well, like in my current practice. But for me, it was always about wanting to be. I was always curious. I always wanted to explore. I always felt like the world was bigger than the place that I was. And I find culture fascinating in different places and spaces. And I think that if you can navigate that and you know how to leverage that, I mean, like, the world is your oyster. You get to understand how much opportunity there is in the world.
Yeah. So how do you feel, like, we just talked about like how white men have both propelled both of us in our careers the most? How have relationships, shaped your perspective on leadership?
Relationships are everything. Like, no person goes at this thing alone. right? And so it is about strategic alliances, relationships, stakeholder management. It's really getting to understand, like, what's your stakeholder map? Like, who are the people? I kind of break people into four categories when I think about this. So you start with your advocates. That's people who may have no positional power, who may not, whatever, but they are people who will speak highly of you no matter where they are, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
have your advocates, you have your mentors. So those are the people, obviously, who mentor you into a particular skill or a particular thing you're trying to get to. You have coaches who often help you on the behavioral side, ensuring that you show up in the way that you're supposed to show up. And then there are the sponsors, and those are the people who are speaking for you when you're not in the room, right? All of those things work in concert together. And if you think that you are doing it by merit alone, you will fail. Because if you don't have the relationships with people who are actually speaking your name, regardless of their positional power, and people who are prepared to support you and walk with you on the journey, then you'll fail.
So you said something really interesting about sponsorship and mentorship. So what is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship? Because people get it confused a
All the
lot.
time, right? So
Yeah.
so a mentor. So here's the way that I think about it. A mentor is somebody who's helping you develop a thing. They might give you career advice or help you think about how you might get to a thing. And a mentor could potentially become a sponsor. A
Mm-hmm.
sponsor is somebody who's advocating for you with their using their positional power while they're in a room. So somebody who maybe not your boss, but who really believes in you, and when they're talking about promotions, they're on your side and they're speaking about you. They are thinking about you for opportunities. But here's the thing about sponsors: you may not know that it's happening,
Right.
and
That's
it's
what I
not
was.
something you ask people to do.
Right.
Like, could you be my sponsor and speak for
Sponsor.
me when I'm not there? That is not a thing. But here's the thing: if you're smart, then you figure out ways to really build your mentoring relationships such that they turn into sponsor relationships. Because people need to know you, and a sponsor should be not necessarily your line manager, right? You want somebody else. You want as many people who have positional power in a space speaking your name as possible. So that's why the relationship piece is really important, and it can look a number of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. That the sponsorship and mentorship gets conflated a lot. And for me, I've had the opportunity to have different mentors through different stages of my career, because the mentor from early years is not the mentor I need right now in an executive role, right? Like, but that mentor turned into a sponsor. So like, and then was speaking my name, but also got me some job interviews and like things like so it did turn into that once I evolved too. So people do get it confused, and I'm so glad you said that. You do not ask people, can you be my sponsor? That is not a thing.
That is not a vibe. Like, you're not going
That
to do
is,
that. Don't
and
do
you
that.
can't do that. So over the years, leadership has evolved significantly from like the authoritative models to a more collaborative, emotionally intelligent approach. I wonder, what key shifts have you seen, and what should aspiring leaders pay attention to?
I will say that I'm not sure that I agree. I think that the kind of leadership style and models is really also
Mm-hmm.
dependent on the culture of the organization, because you'll still see a whole bunch of authoritative foolishness happening, right? So if I think about evolved leaders, that's a different conversation. So I would say evolved leaders versus unevolved leaders. And actually, I will also say that, you know, I also do believe that being authoritative has a place in space. I think it is about your ability to access the leadership style that you need to suit the culture and what's required. So here's the thing. If you have, like, let's just say that you're on a leadership team, a member of the board comes down and says, we need X done by Y. You need to let people know that's what's happening. You might not have time to be all collaborative and be loving and sweet, which we like. We like that, but that's not
Mm-hmm.
always the case. And so I think the key here is less about the different types in terms of one being right or wrong, and more around when is it appropriate to access a specific type of leadership. What are the conditions that arise that you might be more authoritative, or that you might be more collaborative, or that you might, the key is, are you doing that with integrity? However you have to show up, are you doing that with integrity? I think that is the bigger piece. Are you doing it with integrity, and are you doing it authentically? And what that means is, when people deal with you, do they know what they're going to get? Or is it going to
Yeah.
be different every time? Because I can deal with my boss saying, India, I need you to do this and do it now. If I know who they are, I know where they come from, I know where their heart is, I know that they have my best interest at heart. Right? If they're being authoritative in that moment, I can live with it. I might not like it, but I can live with it. If it's somebody who I do not like and I do not trust and they're coming at me crazy, then you're going to get resistance, right?
Yep.
And so that's the thing. It's really about who you are as a person as opposed to the type of leadership style that you exhibit in a particular moment, I think.
So like situational leadership
It
almost.
is
Like,
kind of.
yeah,
I think it
yeah,
is. I think
yeah.
it is.
Yeah, it's so funny because I would say if I was thinking about myself as a leader, I would say, I don't never want to be laissez-faire, but then I think, even today, I think somebody asked me something. I was like, girl, you do whatever, laissez-faire, because it wasn't at the top of my priority list. It wasn't at the top of nobody's priority list, actually. And so I just had to be like, do whatever it makes you happy that we can live with it. You know what I mean? So that was how I did it. So I do agree. As much as I try to be a little bit more democratic, I do think that you're right. You have to. There is a time and place for it. And for me, I noticed that I just like you said, it's like when somebody tells me something that I don't trust and they're like the authoritative, that's when I'm ready to be like, okay, don't talk to me. Like who are you? And now we don't forget what we're supposed to be doing because now I'm upset about the way you came at me. Right?
Yeah. But if you trust the person, then those kind of things become less important because you just know where they are. And I think that there's kind of like there's this triangle that I use of values to some extent, and they include things like integrity, trust, communication, like over communicating, decision making, like being decisive as a leader. People will forgive a bad decision, they will not forgive indecision. So you have to make decisions. There are things like that, which are actually, as an individual, independent leader, much more important than the type of style that you use in a moment. Because sometimes, like I said, things call for you to have to be one way or another. Like you said, laissez-faire. Like right now, that's not important to me. And or actually, sometimes laissez-faire is less about it not being important to you and more about you understanding that sometimes you have to let go and let people make decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, totally. So I'm ready to pull on some threads based on your experience. What are some pivotal moments in your career that shaped your leadership philosophy? Because I've heard quite a bit about your philosophy, but like what has shaped that? What are those pivotal moments?
There's one other part of my philosophy that I want to share before I answer that question.
Okay.
And that is about being opportunistic and not and allowing things to emerge sometimes and not having everything so planned that you miss an opportunity. I think there's that part. So I want to add that piece before I answer the question. And there are a couple things. One is there was one particular boss that I adore that I had, very early in my career, well, maybe mid career. And I remember we used to go into these rooms, and this man would like literally have all the answers to everything. Or he'd come in, and there was a decision that needed to be made, and literally people would be like, "Yep, yep, yep," and I'm like, "How does this do?" Because when I come in here, I'm trying to do the Harry Potter stuff he does, and nobody's listening to me. They're not giving me answers. They're not answering me. They're not coming to the solution I want. Like, how does he do this? And I watched him and studied him for a while, and I still couldn't figure it out. So I eventually just said, "Look, I need to know. How did you how do you get people to agree all the time?" And he said, India, I never, ever go into a room where a decision has to be made without having already knowing what's important to the people in the room. So he had already done the he knew like this person's going to want that and this person's going to want that and this person's going to want that. So he did that pre-work. So by the time they got in the room, that was all out the way. And so it felt like he was like magicking a wand, but he had actually done the preparation and the work beforehand. And that was such a lesson for me. And it actually changed everything. And it is such a great piece of advice and it's worked for me like you wouldn't believe. So that was the first thing. The other pivotal point was my first 360 that I got back.
They will take. I just got mine back the other day. So
listen, they will take the life out. They will steal your life, steal your soul.
still snatch your soul right out.
Because people will tell you things, and you're like,
oh yeah.
I guess I asked. But the feedback that I got was that I was probably one of the most effective delivery managers at the time in the whole of the organization. But that I left a trail of dead bodies behind me because I didn't care what it took to get there. And that I cried for like 3 days. I was like, they hate me. They all hate me. And it was that, but it was such valuable feedback. And so it was pivotal in that it made me pay attention to the people piece much more thoughtfully. And also, I sought feedback more often instead of waiting until the end so that I wouldn't like find myself in a position where I got smacked upside my head like I did that time. I literally was in my bed for like 2 days, like this under the
Well,
covers.
it does make you feel like
Exposed. You
mine.
feel
Yes,
exposed.
yes, yes.
Exposed. I felt so exposed. I was like, they see me for something else. It was terrible.
Yeah, and then well, I kept thinking like when I got the results back, I was like, well, my intentions are good, like my intentions. But listen, mine was my 360 was actually quite good. I mean, from a leadership perspective and emotional intelligence. But one of the things that I know about myself is that when somebody starts talking, if you're not giving it to me in bullets, I start drifting away. I start not. So then my team, I knew that these feedbacks came from the team I managed because it said, Charise is a great leader, blah, blah, blah. But I really would like her to be present more. And that is true. Sometimes I'm just not present. Like oh, girl, I got to get me a drink of water. Here I am over here doing it, and then they're like, okay, well, I just had to tell you these 3 things and I can't even get them. So I've learned to kind of adapt, I guess, to trying to change that. I will ask you, what does self-awareness, because you have to be self-aware and you have to become self-aware to adjust. So what's that journey look like?
Ooh. I think there's it's like the stages of grief.
The stages of grief.
Because you're like, damn, I thought I was doing something and here I am. It's a mess. I think that it is. I mean, like I said, you feel super exposed at the beginning because you feel like everybody's looking at you, and actually nobody's thinking about you, but you feel like everybody's looking at you, and that you can feel like a failure. You do go through all of these emotions first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which are almost like the stages of grief, right?
Yeah.
There's the shock, there's the anger, there's the there's the depression, there's the bargaining, there's the kind of moving through the whole
Yes.
process.
Yeah.
It is truly like the stages of grief when you're kind of like going through this thing when you thought you showed up in one way and your intention and your impact didn't align and people experience that differently. It is horrible, especially when you're well intended, because you really didn't intend to hurt anybody along the way, and you do. And so I think the journey of self-awareness is around allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to even ask deeper questions, like
Mm-hmm.
asking people like, I had this feedback, what does that mean? Like, making sure
Right.
that you're really clear about how you're really impacting people and that you're being thoughtful. And so I think the journey is really about, very similarly to my statement around not necessarily needing to have the answers and allowing the opportunities to emerge. It is allowing your leadership and allowing your development to emerge, because you'll think you know exactly what you need to do, but
Mm-hmm.
that may not be the thing to get you to the ultimate kind of self-awareness and ultimate. And here's the thing. When I say ultimate self-awareness, I mean that is nirvana. Most of us have everybody has blind spots. And
Yes.
when you're in stress, you go right into them. You go right into the things that are the
Yes.
most comfortable for you. And it takes time to change. So, it is what it is. You'll get there, but you just have to be prepared to hear the feedback. That's the key thing.
The
Really
feedback.
hearing what people are saying.
In my master's program, feedback, we had a whole section on feedback. It was OD. So we had a whole section on feedback. And one of the things that I took out of that, which I've learned to use, is when you are going to give feedback, first of all, be open to feedback as a person receiving feedback. But when you are going to give feedback, asking for it, asking, would you mind if I provide you some feedback? And not just going into, listen, and just telling somebody feedback, more like asking them, not permission, but like, can I give you some feedback about how you showing up? You know what I mean? And so I thought that was really like impactful. Now, as a woman of color, a Black woman in executive spaces, you're going into all these, you are a rock star, you're going around the world. But then even in your I would say your corporate life, what challenges did you face, and how did you navigate them?
Imposter syndrome, girl, I always felt like somebody was going to find me out. Always. I always felt like with every promotion that it was a trick. It was either a trick. I mean, not necessarily as overtly that, but I always felt like they're giving me the thing that's going to fail. Like, is that what's happening here? Like, I always was real suspicious of the things that I earned, and I earned it. It wasn't given to me, but in hindsight, I can see that I earned it. But at the time, I felt like I was going to get found out, and so imposter syndrome was a huge thing for me. As I kind of moved up the ladder, and definitely the more senior you become, and the more senior, the reason it happened, the more senior I became, is because as you move into those bigger and bigger seats, they're finite. There are fewer and fewer of them, and more people want them. And so then you really feel like everybody's coming for you, even if they're not. And so that positioning can make you feel really a little bit out of kilter. And so what I had to get to, and what I always coach people into, is that nobody gives you a seat because they think you might be able to do it. Like, that is a no thing. Like, that nobody's, especially as leaders, as senior leaders, like, nobody's putting you in the seat that they think, oh, maybe India will be good at this. They're putting you there once you've already been demonstrating it, and they can see that you do it, and you do it already. They just are catching up on the promotion part. And that's what I try to get people to remember. Nobody's being like, oh, here, try this. We think you might be able to. You can do it. If they gave it to you, they know you can. And so that, I'm kind of like, if somebody else believes in me enough to put me here, then surely I should believe
I
in
can believe
myself.
myself. Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That is, I mean, and that's a struggle I have as a Black woman in leadership and being an executive. I mean, especially me, because I moved up. I just got there, you know what I mean? Like, not too long ago. And so for me, I have been, that imposter syndrome is so real. Like, it's so real because you're like, okay, I don't belong here. I don't belong here, or somebody's going to take it from me or something. You know what I mean? So those are real. Yeah, those are real feelings. And
They
so,
are.
and it's hard. So how do you like kind of, so you navigate them by saying, look, I'm going to believe in myself and betting on yourself.
You just have to. Like, the thing is that you're not going to get validation externally all the time. So you got to figure out how internally to do that for yourself. Like, sometimes you will, and you can. I do have my little, like, personal board of directors, my little pep cheering squad, to help me out when I'm feeling a little crazy. But sometimes you have to just figure out how you tap into that. And it's a journey. It's not something that I think was something I always did. But I kind of started to learn that if I did, like, again, if I don't believe myself, nobody else is going to. And people can see when you don't believe in yourself. Even though you think that you're masking it, you're not. You're not.
Mm-hmm.
You look like people have this feeling about you not showing up fully. So you got to
Yeah.
do that, or else you also undermine your leadership.
Yeah, I had a show about confidence, and I was talking about how people can see you have confidence or lack thereof as soon as you walk in the room. They can tell. It's something about it. I was just giving my son this lesson about, like, my son he's 13 and he plays video games, but he loves to, like, you know. And so my husband and I are like, stand, put your chest out and walk with your chest out, because it does make you look meek and like you don't have the confidence. And so you can tell as soon as somebody walks into a room. Now, how would you define authentic leadership? Because I know you are very authentic. I'm an authentic leader. Like, how would you define that? And why is that? Why do you think it's important in today's workplace, or is it important?
I just think authentic leadership is just being honest, like, just being who you are. And that, like I said, when you're not being who you are, people can tell. It may be like they're saying things like, I don't know, I can't put my finger on what it is, right? It
Mm-hmm.
might be that they may not be able to be like, this person isn't authentic, but it's that thing where you're kind of like, there's something about this person. I'm like, I'm not sure. I can't put my finger on it. And part of that is them not being authentic and
Yeah.
not sitting truly in who they are. And here's the thing about authenticity. Authenticity doesn't mean you have to share everything. It means being authentic with the things you choose to share.
Thank you. Thank you. Because people think that means you have to show up and tell people your business. That is
Leave it at
not.
home. Leave your business at home.
Leave the business at home. You said leave it at home.
Leave it at
But
home.
haven't you seen, like, people think that being authentic and being vulnerable, they think that those, both of those
Oversharing.
things, oversharing becomes one. And it's like, no, 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 no. Keep that at home. So I have another question and a thread I want to pull on, and that's continuous learning. And what part that do you think that plays in leadership, the journey of continuous learning?
I mean, I think that every person is, even if they don't want to be a continuous learner, because you're learning something every single day that you get up and have a day that you didn't have before, right? And I think
Yeah.
that there's something around But I do think being intentional about it as a leader is really important. Being intentional about understanding your gaps and trying to fill them. And your gaps are always evolving because the environment's always changing. So what you learn next week, it may be you might have something else that comes the week after that. But it really is about knowing and understanding your gaps and marching towards those and always trying to learn and fill those gaps because you'll never get to the end. It's a lifelong thing.
It really is. And another thing I think that plays a part is like self awareness. And that's another gap a lot of times. So I want to, you're so very good at that. And so I want to ask you, like, how do you become more self aware? How does a person become more self aware and fill that gap?
I think self awareness is partially about confidence because it's hard to accept what people say as feedback if you're not confident because it can break you.
It
It can say
can.
things that you're not ready for. So part of it is knowing that understanding this thing that's happening will help you, right? Because I think the whole self-awareness piece, like it's almost impossible to do by yourself. Like you can outline what you believe to be the things
Right.
that people experience, but you don't know if you're not the other people, right? So you have to do the journey of feedback to be able to become truly self-aware. And people are like, oh, I know myself, and well, really, you might know yourself,
Right.
but you might not, and you know your intention, but you don't understand what that impact is to other people. And I think that's the trick. But you have to be ready to hear it too. And you have to create the space for people to be able to give you feedback. Because if you don't, I mean, like, there's a whole bunch of folks where I'm like, I will not even tell them because I know they're not going
It
to hear
fall
me.
on deaf ears.
They're not
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
hear me, right? And there are others who I'm like, I can give the feedback, but it's also important in giving feedback that you do that in a way that's constructive and gentle. Like you don't have to be all bold and nasty and blunt to give somebody feedback on what their impact is. And as a matter of fact, if you do that, then you shut yourself down from being able to give it to them. So it is also about thinking about the best way of giving feedback to a person and doing it with kindness. You don't have to give feedback nastily to make it effective.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lesson, right? So because some people really don't kind of know how to provide that feedback because a lot of times when you're providing feedback, it's a lot of times, sometimes it is not it's to change a behavior or an outcome, right? So when you're giving feedback, it's to change an outcome. If you're giving the feedback, generally the outcome that was there wasn't the one you wanted, so you want to shift
Correct.
things, right? And so then that's where emotions get into play, and that's where people start to get burly and rude about providing feedback.
Facts. But here's the other thing. When it comes to giving feedback, the thing I always say to people as a barometer is, how would you want somebody to give this feedback to you? Like, it's a pretty simple thing. Like, how would I want somebody to tell me this thing? And if you think about it from that perspective, then it becomes a lot easier. Some folks are like, well, I just want to hear it straight, but most people do not. So that's all front. It really is, how would you want somebody with kindness to give you this feedback, and then do it with kindness to the person you're giving it to?
Yeah, yeah. I on my team, I always tell them, I want to give you the feedback because I don't, I look at it as a house. I don't want you stepping outside the house and somebody else giving you the feedback. I prefer to give you the feedback. Sometimes I say that. Now, I know you have been on your own. You have your own amazing business, but you worked in corporate America. So I want you to give us some strategies that you found effective for navigating corporate politics because it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that, to be honest, there are two things that I think are hugely important. The first one is stellar and exemplary performance. Like, you build so much political capital when you are really good at what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be mediocre and be like, oh, I just need to get out of here. I can't wait to get out of here at 5 o'clock. And I'm not saying you just stay late, but my point is, like, being amazing at what you do and being doing what you say you're going to do is political capital. That's number one. That will buy you the most, right? The second thing is your relationships and focusing on building really strong strategic relationships, not just with the people that you like, sometimes with the people you don't. One of my old bosses had this peer who was he was the peer of my boss, who I thought, this man hated me. I was like, every time I had to come into a room with him, he would be giving me the fever. And I was like, this dude is killing me. So somebody gave me this advice and I used it and it worked a charm. I literally went to see I was like, what is it about this guy? He's really obviously very senior. there's something that people really love about him. What is it? And I thought about, I kind of looked at his skills and the capabilities he had. And there was something that he did. He had a skill for negotiation that was really amazing. And so I went to him and I said, you know, I've noticed that you negotiate really well, and it's something I'm trying to develop. Would you mentor me on that thing? Even though I know he hated me and I hated him. Let me tell you how that relationship shifted. Girl, that man became one of my biggest sponsors over time because
Oh my God.
suddenly I'm and I think that a lot of what it was is I think that he was quite intimidated by me, and it came off in a way that was, but when I talked to him about something that I saw him do really well that I wanted him to teach me, honey, that whole thing shifted and very quickly. Like he became a real like advocate, real sponsor in a way that I hadn't expected, like within 6 months. Right. And so my point is that you sometimes have to even talk to the people that you don't love because they'll give you the best feedback. They will give you the most authentic. And so that's those stakeholder relationships are really important, and having relationships around the place so that if shit goes down,
No, shit. You can say shit. It's if shit goes down,
you have support. You have people that you can rely on and lean on and ask for
yeah.
advice, but who also will be your voice in places that you're not, where there may be big things going on. And so that relationship piece and being exemplary at your job are the two things I think that are the biggest and probably the only two things I really focus on.
Okay. All right. Well, what habits and routines, because we all have our habits and routines that have helped get us where we are. I know one of mine is I really have to get a great night's sleep, and I have to like have a night routine and everything to be able to wake up the next day and feel fully ready for work. So what are some habits or routines that have contributed to your professional success, like personal habits?
That's a good question because I really couldn't tell you that because I am so all over the place. I'm like habits, like no day is ever the same for me. I don't know. I mean, that's a really good one. I mean, I am a sleeper. I do like to try to get 8 hours of sleep a night. And I'm also an eater. Like I like food. And what I mean is that like, and I'm not saying that it's my, but I do think like having, for me, given being honest, the kind of way that I've worked and the amount at which I've worked, like stopping and eating and kind of creating a really comfortable space for myself is a joy. I think that's one of the things that I do is I stop and I eat. Like I try not to eat and work. I try to stop and eat. Like I'll go in the office. I'm here working now, and then I'll go over. We have a little kitchen. I'll go over into the kitchen, sit down and eat or do something. But I try to give myself a little bit of space because sometimes you just got to walk away from things for a minute just to give yourself a break. Like lunch break was for a reason. It was for a break. Right. And so we've gotten to this thing around eating lunch at our desks or eating breakfast at our desks. And while I do that sometimes, I really try to create space and separation. The other thing is that I work at work and I try not to do that at home.
Wow.
I even though I work for myself and I do have a team, I come into the office. I don't work from home because I can't work from home. I mean, I can, but I want the separation. I want home to be my home. I don't want to be working there because I would never stop. I know myself. And I don't have time, but I really try to have the separation.
Okay. All right.
That's my.
Yeah, I mean, those habits are like really important. I love the not eating at your desk because I know I do that. So it is just such a bad habit. Number one, it's just not good for you to just like to not get up and be moving around at least. And then the other part is like you do want some separation from your meal and your work. Like you just should have that separation. It's something I really have to work on because I am not very good at that. So what's one piece of advice that you wish you had received earlier in your career?
Don't compare yourself to other people because we're each on our own journey. And like it might seem like it's happening faster for other people, but you are exactly where you're supposed to be in the moment that you're there. And what sometimes you'll see is, well, it's not fair. This person got that or that person got X. Sometimes that's sparing you too. Like you have to like really see the message in the things that are happening around you. But it's not all, even though it may not be exactly what you want, like you want it when you want it, there's value in the journey and you have to, again, allow things to emerge.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think about advocacy for yourself? Like, how does that play a part? We got to go to work. We got to advocate for ourselves. I always say, if you don't advocate for yourself, nobody's going to do it for you. But what does that look like? Because that can look very different for different people. What is the right way, or what is a way to advocate for yourself for the things you want professionally?
Believe that a big part of the problem that people have, and particularly women and Black people, and other communities of color, but particularly women and Black people, is that we have, even though we know it's not true, we operate as if it were a meritocracy. E.g., you keep your head down, do a good job, and do a really good job of what you do, and expect that somebody's going to recognize that. Right? And that's not how it works. That is not the system in which we operate. And so it's about communicating what you want. And people don't do that. Like, I know, I'm in this job now. My role, what I want to do is be, promoted to X in X period of time. Having those conversations are critical, because even if it doesn't happen in this moment, you've set an expectation for what you want to get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And people don't do that. They just are like, they're doing their job. They're like, I got passed over. Nobody even considered me. Did you say that's what you wanted? Because that's what everybody else is doing. Did you say that I want X, and this is kind of like my timeline? And did you ask, this is what I want to get to, what's the path? Or did you assume because you're doing a good job, that's the path? And that gap is what often kills people. So I think there's this thing around communicating what you want and asking questions about how to get there. And then setting that expectation with people so that they'll look for it. And here's the thing: if they can't, often what you'll get, and this as an HR person, often what'll happen is they can't promote you, so they pay you. Well, I'll take the money. That's good.
Yep. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
we can't promote them this year, so let's
But
make
we can
sure
give
we
you
pay
a
them.
little, yeah.
They're important to us, so we want to
Right.
keep them. So people will try to do what they can, within the boundaries of what they have, if you communicate it, if you are excellent at your job, and if you have the relationships.
But I want to pull on this thread because you said it. Black people and women, we generally don't advocate for ourselves that well.
Not in the same way.
Not in the same way. And it's cultural. And what I will say though is I think it's because I think history, but I think because we're treated like sometimes you got a job, why ain't you just happy? You know what I mean? Like that's sometimes what you get. So then you're like, okay, I got a job, then I should just be happy.
I think there's part of that, but I also think that culturally, a lot of folks, so there are, in my generation, there are a number of people who are my generation who are like Xers, whose parents were not in corporates.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happens is, and who were maybe have been in jobs where you do keep your head down and do a good job. So part of it is also what people are taught to do and how they're taught to show up. And culturally, one of the ways that, depending on the kind of job that you're in, one of the ways to grow is to be doing a great job, and you're recognized, by tenure, you get more, right? Whereas that's not true in corporate code. And there's not a lot of, it's for women and for Black people and other people of color. There wasn't that continuity of people in the space before you to give you that information. And so folks went in with this behavior that's very tenured, when actually that's not what it's about, generally speaking, in corporate environments. It's a different playbook.
Yeah. And that is so true, because I look at myself. My grandfather worked in the steel mill. My grandmother was a nurse. So neither one of them had corporate jobs. Yeah. And so they work, and I'm talking about they worked there till they retired, the whole, you know what I mean? Like the whole 9 yards. Yep. And so those are jobs where, you do your job, you do what you do, especially my grandfather working in the steel mill, that's just like widget making, you do your job, you do, or whatever. And I think that's mostly for Black people and women, but especially Black people. And I can speak from that, just being a Black woman. It's the knowledge. You don't have that same knowledge, just like we don't have the same knowledge about money, credit. All of those things play a part in advancement, I think. So what do you do? Would you say to someone, a Black woman who wants to advance, and hasn't had that exposure? How do they get that exposure?
Yeah. No, I think that it is like finding mentors, right?
Yeah.
And asking those questions, like looking at people who are very successful in the environment you're in and asking those questions, like, how do I get from here to, it's like in a safer space.
Yeah.
In the first instance. And some of the things I'm saying are assuming people are prepared and comfortable asking the question. But if you're not, then find a mentor, find somebody in your space who's a senior-ish person who has navigated to at least a certain point, and ask them how they did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't just assume that because you're doing the job and because you do the job well that you're going to grow through the company or business or career. It's not that way.
Yeah, because people are, and I try to tell folks this, people are busy doing their job. So, like, yes, they want to they want to pay attention to their people that work with them. Oh, yeah, they're doing a good job. But you got to speak up for yourself because I'm doing my job. So, if you need something, you got to tell me. And I say that a lot. Like, please don't assume that I see this because I have work to do as well. I'm going to try to see it, but who knows if I did because I'm also busy, right?
For sure.
So I'm going to ask a controversial question. What do you think, how do you think leadership, I mean, we're in a new world. How do you think our current climate in the United States, I mean, you've been all over the world. I know they laughing at us, but
No, they're actually horrified and frightened.
yeah, like us. Okay. So how do you think that is changes the landscape for us, like from being in leadership positions, all like the DEI being pulled back, all of these things that were there to help people that didn't have the head start to get, like how is that going to how do you think that what's the impact of that?
I mean, we go backwards. I mean, like that, we're already backwards. We've already gone well backwards. And I think the first, indication, regardless of where you sit on the issue, was Roe versus Wade,
Yeah.
Dobbs, all those things. Like there have been indications that this was all where it was going for a very long time, and for people to be surprised is shocking to me. I think that people need to wake up because, it's kind of like that frog boiling thing. Like the frog will be boiling until it's too late and then it's dead. I'm not saying that, but I mean, my point is we're in the boiling water. We're
Yeah.
in the boiling water. And I think, when you think about what leadership requires in this moment and what it requires of leaders is people to be brave and courageous and not be afraid. Like fear, faith and fear don't live in the same place. Can't live in the same house, right? And so, you have to not be fearless. And here's the other thing. You can't be afraid to risk something because here's the thing. You could be afraid to risk your little whatever it is material thing that you have and lose everything because you made a choice about something that was small and not that consequential in the grand scheme of things. And
Yeah.
so it is about what you're prepared to risk and being brave and courageous and standing up for what's right and not allowing yourself to be drawn in to the fear that people will create around you for having a voice and an opinion. And will that be challenging for some? Yep, it will. But the week and the week will be certainly kicked to the curb on this one because it's going to be about folks who have the courage to step up and lead at a time when it's hard to do so. That's when you'll find out who the real leaders are. People, Gary, show you who they are real
Okay.
quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is scary times, right? Like, I mean, I, with DEI, I mean, like you said, Roe v. Wade, I saw this coming, right? Like, this is no surprise. We saw Project 2025 unfolding 2 years ago, right? We
Facts.
saw that, like, and now it's just like that was, this ain't no dress rehearsal. We are in it, like, right now.
We are in
And
it.
and I think you're right. Like that courage to be able to push back. Like, no, I'm not doing this because that's not right. Like, it's not the right thing to do. I just think it's just an interesting place that we're in now. But before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you one last thing. India, please tell us about Act Three.
Okay, so Act Three was something that I founded with some others. I mean, there are 14 people on the advisory board, and there are 6 global ambassadors for Act Three, and it is around creating a community for women in midlife. We have a live convening June 4th through 6th in Washington D.C. at the Washington Hilton. It is really about building community around the things that are important for women in midlife and beyond. So that is caretaking up and down. That's identity and aging. That is a grief and healing as we start to lose people and we're healing from that. And all the other kind of things that happen. It is menopause and women's health and wellness. I know everybody shakes their head on that one. It is financial freedom and independence, understanding what it requires for you to move into the next phase, whether that's retirement or whatever you want to call it. What does it require financially for me to do that? And women aren't often equipped with that. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing, amazing convening. And we were doing it very non-traditionally in that, at a certain age, women cannot sit and listen to panels all day. Like I know that I cannot. And the other thing that we found is that when you think about these kind of convenings and conferences, the wisdom is often with the people in the room. who are sitting in the room. So the way that we're structured is there are 15-minute provocations. It could be a panel, maybe a keynote, maybe it's a thing. And then we break into breakout groups depending on people's interests so they can actually build community and talk about it in facilitated spaces. So this is going to be a whole thing. We have a bookstore that we've curated. We have wonderful shops that we've curated. We have a relaxation lounge with chair massages and reflexology and all of the things. We have a live podcast.
I love this.
There's some really cool stuff. So I just say, come to Act 3. Women in midlife and beyond. This is for you. If you know a woman in midlife or beyond, let her know. It's www.act3convening.com. See you there. Boom.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, India. I'm going to put this, I'm going to plug it. So it's going to be everywhere. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And until next time, Queens.
Thank you.